So welcome and thank you for coming along to today's regional food conversation. We're reconvening. We met about 6 months ago, back in early October, for the regional food conference. And we agreed at that meeting that we would come back together 6 months later to share updates, to share knowledge across the 4 counties of South West Wales, and to keep the conversation going about what we want for the future of our regional food system. We think it's so important to try and break down some of those silos, enabling collaboration across the region, but also enabling us all to learn from some of the fantastic initiatives and projects that are going on across South West Wales and of course across Wales and beyond. So knowledge sharing and breaking down silos is one of our key objectives. And what we feel is the importance of connecting around a shared sense of purpose and empowering people to start food initiatives or to join existing initiatives to make change happen at a local level. For the region, we really believe that that's a really powerful nexus for change. Local place-based initiatives led by people who are passionate about the issues, but collaborating across counties, across the regional footprint to make sure we're all building on what each other are doing, connecting the dots, and that together we represent a really strong voice and force for change. I'm going to do a quick whiz through at the beginning of today's meeting of some of the outcomes of the previous conference. We published a food conference report, which was a bit of a manifesto for change, bringing together all the conversations that we'd had over that 2-day event last October. So I'm going to whiz through the kind of key findings just to refresh our memories. But give me a bit of a wave if you were here in October. Let me get a sense of who was here last time. I expect quite a few of you were. Yeah, that's great. And some new faces as well. So a bit of a mixture. Right, I'm going to share my screen and talk you through the report, which some of you will have seen, but it just gives us a nice basis for today's meeting. So my colleague Evie will share the link in the chat to this manifesto later on, this conference report rather. But as you will recall, we had a number of partners collaborating to deliver the event last time, not least Swansea Environmental Forum and kind support from Group Resilience in Pembrokeshire. And we were also pleased to involve the Sustainable Food Trust, the University of Wales Trinity St David, NFU Cymru, Caitan, which is a community supported agriculture project here on the Gower in Swansea, all working together to host a conversation that brought a diverse range of people and stakeholders together. We really work hard to ensure we've got a good spread of representation from across different parts of the food system. So that's really important to us. And when we looked at the breakdown of who was who, we had lots of just interested individuals, which is what we love to see, and community groups, as well as farmers and growers and businesses and people from education, academia and the public sector. We can always do more and work harder to make sure underrepresented groups are represented. And I think one of the challenges for these conversations about food is to bring people into these meetings who don't normally talk about food and aren't normally naturally part of these kinds of discussions. And that's part of the work to break down the silos and ensure that our conversations are properly challenging, that we're hearing from people with different perspectives from our own as well. We asked why this conversation was important, and I'm sure these themes will come up again, but it's as much about tackling health concerns and diet-related disease, which is a huge issue across the UK, as much about that as it is about the environment and the sustainability of our food system, and the climate and nature emergencies are obviously at the forefront of all our minds. But knowing where our food comes from, knowing what's in it, concerns about animal welfare, and sharing good practice, learning and scaling what works. The big issues: food security, nutrition security, food poverty, Supporting local producers to create a resilient local economy is really important to a lot of us. Reconnecting people with where their food comes from. People have perhaps lost that relationship with locally produced food, and challenging the dominance of supermarkets and their supply chains, but the need to engage people in thinking about the effects of our food system on the environment and to produce food sustainably and ethically, and yet affordably. So a number of key themes emerged, and we had breakout room discussions and pulled out some key perspectives around health, which was a really primary discussion. Health came up again and again, and I remember Patrick Holden talking about his children who had never taken antibiotics in their lives and who had benefited from their healthy diet living on a farm, and the difference between the health and well-being of children and families who have access to locally grown, regeneratively farmed produce versus those children and families living in communities without access to fresh food, who suffer from all kinds of diet-related diseases, and making those connections is so important. And we reflected on the fact that perhaps our health system traditionally hasn't made those connections clear enough for people, empowering people to take care of their own health by making different choices about the food they eat, but making that food accessible and affordable to people, whether that's through more community growing and community gardens as part of the social prescribing movement, but also really we've got to have those conversations with our health boards who are increasingly aware of their role in promoting healthy food, both from a procurement perspective, but also in educating people about the importance of diet in maintaining good health and well-being. The environment was obviously an underlying overarching theme. Food waste is a huge contributor to carbon emissions and the climate emergency, and we are collectively devastating our ecological systems through the way that factory-based farming has taken place. So real support for a food system, transforming a food system that works for nature and works for the climate, regenerating the soil, and encouraging those regenerative practices and agroecology. So there's a huge amount of really great stuff going on across Wales and beyond, and real frustration about the difficulty in scaling that up and spreading that good practice and going mainstream. On the other hand, we heard from a lot of farmers who are doing amazing things on their farms and really do see themselves as activists for the environment in the way they farm. So it's important to acknowledge and celebrate those farmers who are doing amazing work already, and not to see farming as the enemy, because as the NFU said, and as many of the farmers that joined our first conversation were keen to point out, they are doing a lot and farming is changing, and perhaps some of us aren't aware of all the ways in which that's happening. So there are lots of positives as well as a massive challenge still to address. Land comes up again and again, availability of land for farming at all scales, and that's right down to sort of private and personal scales of allotments, and land for communities and community groups, so making land available within communities for farming, and then farming as a career or as a business, enabling new entrants into the market, making land available for people to start up in farming, and access to land, the biggest barrier for more local farming enterprises. And comments on the sort of quality of Welsh farmland, but perhaps its suitability for growing different types of produce, or particularly its suitability for different approaches to farming, perhaps previously less favoured area Welsh land, which is unsuitable for certain types of farming, but those who are involved in regenerative agriculture are able to produce huge amounts of food from land that would otherwise previously have been considered unsuitable. So what we can do to address the barriers in terms of lack of land. And we talked about the fact that huge swathes of land across Wales are being sold off to corporations to use for carbon offsetting activities, and how this is in conflict with the need for more land for food growing. So challenges and different demands being made on our land. I won't talk about all of these things in detail, having covered those key themes there, but we recognise that there are a number of different agents for change. The public sector and policymakers are clearly key agents for change, and we want those people, those organisations, to involve and listen to people, to make land available, to lead the way through procurement. And obviously food policy and regulation and legislation is key to all of this. But we didn't want to delude ourselves that that's the only way we can make change happen. So we also looked at what businesses and producers are doing and can do. We want to connect hospitality businesses with local suppliers. We want to enable better collaboration among small producers to make sure we're strengthening local supply chains and enabling better distribution of local food. And we want to map those regional infrastructure and facilities and producers so that we have a much clearer picture of who's doing what across our region. Schools and educators are regarded as really key to all of this. We talked a lot about young people and their connection to food. What can schools do? How can we connect schools with farms, make food much more central to the curriculum and to what children are thinking about and talking about at school, and also raise awareness of the amazing diversity of career opportunities that exist within the food and drink sector. And that doesn't just mean getting your hands dirty working on farms, but there is huge opportunity across the whole system, whether you're interested in digital and technology, interested in working with people in hospitality, or interested in reconnecting with the actual production of food on farms. Communities, now this is where a lot of us can really make a difference and start to make change happen, building local food movements within our own communities. Community food activities are regarded as incredibly important for building that kind of grassroots demand for better food, for educating ourselves and each other about where our food comes from and raising awareness of the issue. And we've got this tagline here, which I think is a Welsh Government tagline, every town a market town. That was sort of the vision for Wales, to really put local produce markets at the heart of towns and villages across our region and across Wales, so that local produce is available in all communities. And then all of us as individuals, we have a huge important role to act in alignment with our values. And again, I remember Patrick Holden from the Sustainable Food Trust really emphasising this point, that it's up to all of us to make those choices. And it's too easy and too convenient to slip back into our same old bad habits of supermarket shopping. And he challenged us all to go and look in our fridges and our cupboards and pull out pieces of produce that had a great story attached to them. And so asking ourselves what we're doing to be the market, be the customers for food that's produced in alignment with our values, talking about it and using our own spheres of influence, and asking the question and using our voice, whether that's lobbying supermarkets or politicians or other local businesses, asking when we're eating out where the produce comes from, requesting locally produced food and drink from restaurants and bars that we visit. And there were a number of emerging projects, and it would be nice to hear updates from participants today. If you'd like to share any updates of work that's been ongoing since October. We talked about organising visits to farms, catching up with Julie James in the Welsh Government, improving dialogue with the public services boards, but in particular establishing Swansea and Carmarthenshire as sustainable food places. And I think we've been making some progress on that. And we'll hear from other partners today about some of these emerging projects and other events that have taken place since we met in October. So that's a really quick whiz through of this document, which I think is a useful record of the discussion that we had last time. So thank you for bearing with me as I've whizzed that through, and I will stop sharing now. So what I'd like to do now is stop talking and invite you guys to have breakout room discussions and then come back and tell us what's important to you. So I've had a quick canter through what we discussed last time, and the question I'd like to invite you just to discuss quickly in your groups, and I'm sure you'll pull out some of the themes we've already covered and possibly some new ones, but why are you interested in food? And what would you like to get out of this morning's discussion? So why are you interested in food? And what would you like to get out of this morning's discussion? Now, there won't be time in these breakout rooms for everyone to introduce themselves, because I'm going to give you less than 10 minutes in these breakout room conversations. They're self-facilitated, so that means you need to regulate yourselves, make time for everyone to speak. I learned a good acronym recently at a training that I was happy to be part of, which is the word WAIT, and I try and remember this myself. I'm very guilty of this, but WAIT stands for why am I talking? So in your small breakout groups, wait and make sure everyone else has the opportunity to speak as well. And a minute or so each to answer the question, why are you interested in food, and what would you like to get out of this morning's discussion? Don't spend time introducing yourselves, have a lovely conversation, come back here in 10 minutes and be ready to share some perspectives with the wider group. Thank you very much. You should see a button to go into a breakout room, have a little chat, and I'll bring you back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for playing along with the breakout rooms. I hope you had time for interesting little discussions in your room. I asked you to talk about why you're interested in food and what you're hoping to get out of this morning's conversation.
Hi everybody, great to see you. Some familiar faces and new ones too. Yeah, in terms of our group and what we wanted from today, just to get a better idea, I think, of what's going on across the region. We hear of really incredible projects, initiatives, schemes, forums, sustainable food places, trusts, all sorts of stuff. And it is brilliant that it's going on. But sometimes, at least to me, it feels like a bit of a web, and it's kind of like, okay, it's a bit tangled in some places in my head. And just to understand how those collaborations work for the best for everybody, and perhaps also where there are gaps that you know, as a group of people and organizations, we can help address those gaps, or at least start by understanding what those gaps are. And yeah, around that then for me it's kind of best practice, how you scale it up or how you duplicate it in different places. Also, poverty is a really big one. Poverty, health inequalities across the region as well. As Mary informed us, in terms of the I think it's the government Eat Well guidelines, in the poorest household, they would need to spend 65% of their income in order to meet those guidelines and have a healthy diet. Another thing that came up was access to land for community growing or bigger scale growing for new entrants. And then also routes to growing, routes for people to actually become self-sufficient or contribute to community projects.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. I can see Jeff agreeing very strongly with what you've said there. So just for the meeting to be aware, this jazz hands action is how you show massive support for anything that anybody says. So feel free to use some of these hand signals. Thank you, Helen. That was a précis of your group's discussion. Would anyone else like to share your thoughts, either summarise what was talked about in your group or just pull out your own points? Why are you interested in food, and what would you like to happen in this conversation today? I'm looking for anyone else's raised hands. Jeff.
Yes, thanks, Dawn. Well, why am I interested? Well, I'm interested in food because it's absolutely fundamental to my life. And that I'm talking about healthy food. It's fundamental to my health, to my continued life, to my ability to be able to function in my community. and so on and so forth. It's so fundamental. And what I think is the elephant in the room that I would like to take from this discussion today is for people to understand the depth of the problem that we face when we're talking about these things. I'm hoping there's other farmers in the room that can explain how difficult it is to actually grow food. And it's even more difficult to do so in a healthy way. So what we're talking about really is fundamentally changing the way that we're using the land in our country. And let's talk about Wales here. I have the vision to be able to say, let's bring back a mixed farming model. Let's bring back as many local markets as we can muster. Let's sell the fact that we're producing all of our own food and we're sustaining our population ourselves. And we can then talk about sustainability to other countries and probably sell these ideas abroad. So without addressing the problem that farming is facing, I think we're all just, we're all just really wasting our time if we continue to discuss this and we fail to act on the ground. And that is access to land and using the skills that we have to feed ourselves. And my personal thing is open pollinated seed availability. The fact that everyone, I believe, has a human right to not only grow their own food, but also to save their own seed. We won't talk about the commercial aspects of that. I'm just talking about people being able to have the knowledge to be able to grow their own food in perpetuity. So that's what I hope to take from this discussion, is that there's a deeper understanding of the magnitude of the problem, and that we don't think that just jazz hands is going to get us out of this problem. It's going to be some really hard work on the ground between smaller groups where there's wide expertise in the area they're looking at, whether that's food production, food distribution, or food consumption. These are huge, huge topics. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Well put. Yeah, food is fundamental, and the scale and depth of the challenge. And, you know, I think we are all really keen to see that progress made, and frustrated by lack of progress, and as many small initiatives and good ideas and good practice that we see happening, which of course should be celebrated. Unless we can really address this at scale and the kind of level of importance that's required, then we'll still be having this conversation in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and that won't do. Thank you, Jeff. Who else would like to share? Why are you interested in food, and what would you like to get out of today's conversation? I'm looking for waving hands. Margot.
I was hoping there might be someone here today from Llanelli's food pantry, because I want to see what the difference is for all kinds of groups between the continuation of food banks and looking at the cooperative food pantry as an alternative. Sorry.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, maybe there is someone here who can talk to us about that as the morning goes on. And if there aren't any other waving hands just at the moment, I think I'll take this opportunity to introduce one of our presenters this morning. We've got just a few people lined up to talk to us about what's happening across the region, which hopefully will spark further discussion and help us, as Helen was saying, to understand who's already doing what. And there are some fantastic things going on. So I'm going to come to Augusta Lewis from CAVS, the Carmarthenshire Association of Voluntary Services. And Augusta is part of a team working on making Carmarthen or Carmarthenshire, I'm not sure, a
Carmarthenshire,
sustainable
yeah.
food place. Carmarthenshire, a sustainable food place. So Augusta, can I hand over to you for a few minutes and you tell us what you're up to in Carmarthenshire?
Sure. Thank you, Dawn. Bore da pawb. I'll try and share my screen if that's okay. I've just got a few brief slides. So my name's Augusta Lewis. I am the Carmarthenshire Food Network Assistant. In my current role, I'm funded by the Wales Poverty Alleviation Fund. I came into post November last year, and I am based at Carmarthenshire Association of Voluntary Services. So Carmarthenshire Food Network, I will just talk a little bit about that first, and then I'll introduce Bywd Syrgar Food. So the Carmarthenshire Food Network really came about in sort of early 2021 at the height of the pandemic and the lockdowns, when it became very pressingly obvious and evident that there was food poverty issues that were coming to the fore in terms of the need to access emergency food, and particularly in certain areas of the county, that need was the response to that need was coming from people working on the front line, including town and community councillors themselves. So the network was really it came about with that as the kind of seed. And then beyond that, before I came into post, there'd been some great work laid down by my line manager, Jamie Horton at Cavs, as well as the steering group to develop various clusters within the network. So we have sort of 5 to 6 clusters depending, and some crossover between them within the network. We have the food banks and community hot food projects, as mentioned. We have community growing projects represented within the steering group by Incredible Edible Carmarthenshire. We have professional chefs that focus on using local and sustainable produce. We have professional growers and farmers who are working in the area using agroecological methods. We also have local produce markets, as well as wider community support services around helping to alleviate food poverty and the associated factors. So for example, the Wales Warm Home Scheme, Threshold, Domestic Abuse Service, and so on. So those are our networks. So this map is something we've created in collaboration with Carmarthenshire County Council. It's work in progress, by the way. It's not a completed project at the moment, but we're developing our web page, and this is a visual depiction of some of our clusters across the county. So that is loosely how the network is composed. There's a visual representation of our members. At the moment, we are expanding. Part of my role has been to expand the network. We have new members coming in all the time. So I've been hosting online meetings, of course, because everything has been online, to begin work within clusters to include a training element and a networking element to sort of bring people together. And then, over time, we hope to also facilitate work between the clusters as well, so that we can start to join up and make those links for short supply chains and access to nutritious food and all the other wonderful things that can come about from a evolved and evolving food system. So that is roughly how it looks currently. And then we have, so within the steering group of Carmarthenshire Food Network, we have CAVS, we have Carmarthenshire County Council, we have a whole of our nutrition team, the community nutrition team. So one of the things we've been doing is to promote the Eat Well guide and access to a balanced plate. So we work with the community nutrition team to try and ensure that our community organisations can access good sort of evidence-based training to disseminate within their organisations through kind of engagement projects that hopefully, enjoyable for participants and promoting the enjoyment of eating good food along the way too. We've got, as I mentioned, Incredible Edible Carmarthenshire, and then we've also got Superbox, Alex Cook representing the private sector on the steering group, and we've got Public Health Wales representation there as well. So any questions, please do ask as we go along, or I'm happy to take questions at the end.
We'll take some Q&A at the end, if that's okay, Augusta.
Of course. So as briefly mentioned, we have put in an application to become a sustainable food place, which probably most of you know is a sort of award system which has been devised by a partnership through the Soil Association, Sustain, and I'm forgetting the other partner, but in Wales it's looked after by Food Sense Wales. So we put in our application a few weeks ago on a county-wide basis to do that. And for that purpose, our lead stakeholder is Carmarthenshire County Council, and we have a new steering group that has emerged to take that forward at a strategic level, which is called Bywd Sergar Food, and we have public service board support there, and we have well, the steering group is still emerging there, but we have had the opportunity to form a vision statement. I'm sorry that's not incredibly clear, but I'll read it out to you. So Bywd Sergar Food aims to empower our communities through a co-productive approach for a resilient and diverse local food system for Carmarthenshire. Our vision is to enable social, cultural, environmental and economic regeneration with increased access to healthy food from local producers, whilst promoting nature recovery and community health and wellbeing. We will work in a culturally sensitive, forward-thinking and inclusive manner through education, communication and access to opportunity to promote a thriving local food system for all. So that's the intention behind the way we hope to work within the county. That's just about it from me, really. We are working in close collaboration with the food hubs that are emerging from support through Planet, the Rural Development Programme, and also we're working closely with Social Farms and Gardens. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fab, thank you, Augusta. Feel free to stop sharing your screen and we'll see if there are questions for you from the room. One of the interesting things about your update there, so Carmarthenshire is applying to become a sustainable food place as part of the Sustainable Food Places Network, and interesting that that is being led by Carmarthenshire Council. So there's a difference there in how we're trying to progress a similar thing in Swansea. We're not council led, we're entirely volunteer led. So it'd be interesting to think about some of the sort of pros and cons of both those models. And really, yeah, great to hear you're making progress. Your application is in, so you're a little bit ahead of us. We held our first food assembly earlier this week, or no, end of last week. So some differences and some similarities, but I wonder whether anyone in the room has any questions or reflections based on what Augusta has presented there about what's happening in Carmarthenshire. Some great work on the mapping. I think that looks really useful. Mary, would you like to come in there?
Thank you. So yeah, Dawn, as you just mentioned, we're not being led by the local authority here in Swansea. And what I'm interested in is whether the council in Carmarthenshire kind of sees Carmarthenshire as a food producing area, because I don't think Swansea Council sees Swansea as a food producing area. Within the council chamber, there is one food producer who is a dairy farmer, but there isn't a sense that growing food or producing food is something that's really integral to the identity or culture of the local area. And I wonder if that's different in Carmarthenshire and whether that might have made a difference to you.
I suppose I can't really speak on behalf of the council as a whole, and I'm sure there's a whole range of perspectives there, but our representative from the council, Gwyneth Ayres, is very on board with the vision of the network, which is fabulous. And of course, you know, in Carmarthenshire, forces and factors such as the Common Agricultural Policy have really defined what we do as a county, which is largely meat and dairy. But of course, we do have emerging small-scale horticulture producers, and I think we're all waiting to see what the agriculture bill and the new schemes are going to look like in terms of support for small-scale horticulture as well. So no, I think particularly with Public Health Wales around the table and the council, we are very keen to promote the sort of fresh food element and the short supply chain thing there. I think my colleague Jamie might want to add something, because she's sending me a message. I'm not quite sure what she's saying, but I think she's got a point. Jamie, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Hi Mary, I too can't speak on behalf of the council, but you know, there is a lot of passion within the council. They are leading on obviously circular economy work and local procurement. There's a lot of behind the scenes work going on at the moment with schools. So you know, we certainly have the passion from our representative who sits on the Carmarthenshire Food Network at a strategic level. So we're quite privileged in that way. But yes, there's definitely support and backing. And I think the difficulty is that there's certainly with the schools at the moment, with the free school meals, you know, the idea ultimately is going to be that local plate. But that's going to come with time, isn't it? So yes, they are stepping up.
Do you mind if I just clarify, Dawn? Sorry, because I don't live in Carmarthenshire, so I don't really know what the local culture is like and what, you know, the sense of identity in that area is like. So whilst I understand you can't speak on behalf of the council, and I try not to speak on behalf of the Swansea Council, I'm just wondering how much local culture has to do with their support of this agenda. You know, I think Swansea Council has its priorities and its sense of a Swansea identity, which influence what it prioritises and where it puts support. And I don't mean to suggest that Swansea Council is letting down this agenda in any way. That's not for me to suggest. I'm just wondering how much the local culture and identity as a food producing area might be influencing their involvement in that. Is that something that you feel, as people who are resident in Carmarthenshire, is important for this agenda?
Well, I don't know if I do think that it's anything Carmarthenshire specific. My feeling has been that various factors like the pandemic and gaps on the shelves and Brexit and kind of larger factors, declarations of climate emergencies and looking for ways to decarbonise and so on, have fed into people's kind of just suddenly the penny dropping and thinking, food, you know. So I think it is a matter of sort of identifying that key kind of person who's already kind of there with you, if you can find that individual, and you just have to hope they're there, I suppose, and I very much hope they are.
And I think also it did come out in our wellbeing assessment as a key priority for the county.
Yes, good point. And the wellbeing assessments are ongoing, and new plans are set to be published shortly. So we're all hoping to see food really high up on the agenda across the region. Jack, would you like to come in and introduce yourself in your new role?
Yes, yeah. I think on the back of that, probably a good time to talk. Hello. Yes, my name's Jack, and I am currently very newly appointed local food coordinator within the economic funding team in Swansea Council. And so it's a brand new role which the council have created to help shorten food chains, and improve sort of local food networks. It's solely it is within economic sort of projects, but it's quite an exciting sort of you know, that role has been created, and now I'm obviously appointed. So like I said, it's very new, and I'm just getting to basics with a lot of stuff. I've come from running a food business previously to doing this. So I'm kind of, my head is, you know, working with, shortening supply chains. That's done in Swansea through a business called Farmco. And we're currently working on projects. The first one being a local producer mapping project. So we are finding out what people are growing, where they're doing it, at what scale they're doing it, where they are, where they deliver, and then that information is going to be open to the public once completed. And it's a very small step, but it's a step in the right direction for for what we need, really.
Thank you. Yeah, great to hear that. And hopefully that mapping process can be a bit of a collective effort. And I'm sure partners in the room today would be keen to feed things in to you for that, Jack. So let's move the conversation on. We are lucky enough to have with us today, supporting the event, Peter Howells from NFU Cymru. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Peter, and ask you to share a brief update, if you wouldn't mind, about what's happening at NFU Cymru, what resonates from the food report from the previous conference. We were grateful for your involvement back in October. And to really represent the voice of some farmers across Wales, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're available, Peter, are you able to talk to us?
Thank you, Dawn. I haven't prepared anything as such. I think you put me on the spot a little bit, but I'll try and give you a bit of a flavour, really, in terms of some of the things that that we're doing at NFU Cymru. But I think probably the one thing really, a sort of a target that the NFU has set for the agricultural industry is to reach net zero by 2040. And we believe that to be able to achieve that aim, we need to see measures that support farmers to improve their efficiency, but also capturing more carbon through the land that we farm and in our soils, and also through boosting production of renewable energy on farm. So, but at the same time, I would emphasize, we're clear that at the same time, we should, as reducing the impact that we have on the climate, we shouldn't reduce our capacity to feed consumers with high quality and affordable food. Just another strategy we've recently launched is our Growing Together strategy. So obviously there's a lot of talk at the moment, really, in all circles, really, from government down, really, in terms of trees and planting trees and tree cover. And we believe that we can increase tree cover in Wales, but doing that side by side with producing high quality food and ensuring that we have thriving rural communities. It is a really hot topic. I think it was touched upon earlier in the introduction, Dawn, in terms of there's huge concerns in terms of the sort of people from outside Wales coming in, buying large tracts of land, nothing more than greenwashing, really, and not doing anything in terms of their own their own sort of carbon footprinting. So just I think it's also been touched. I think Augusta touched on it as well, in terms of there is the agriculture bill, which will be making its way through the Senedd over the next few months. And obviously, that's a huge piece of work, really, and will really set the parameters at the sort of high level in terms of agriculture policy for the next 15 to 20 years. So that is a hugely important piece of work. And sitting below that then will be the sort of sustainable farming scheme and how sort of government supports the industry. So we're a lobbying organisation. We lobby for the benefits of farmers and growers in Wales, and we're looking to have a sustainable farming scheme and a farming policy that is very much made in Wales, that suits the needs of Wales, that meets the aspirations of Wales as a country. And we're fighting, really, to get the best outcome possible for Welsh farming within that. And interesting, really, last week the Welsh government announce some sort of set out some initial plans really in terms of domestic funding in Wales as we come to the end of EU funding. And I think the minister's announced a number of themes that they're looking to commit funding to. And I think we haven't got too much detail really in terms of the schemes at the moment, but I think there was an announcement for £227 million of funding to be made available to Welsh farmers and the rural sector over the next 3 years. And I think it's been touched on a bit already in terms of horticulture. I think there's a little bit on a new horticultural development scheme within that, and I'll find the link and I'll put that in the chat as well. But yeah, I think that sort of probably in a nutshell really is where we are. And obviously we can't be ignorant of what's happening in terms of the geopolitics and the global situation, and particularly looking at what's happening over in the Ukraine. It's being beamed into our living rooms daily, isn't it? The horrendous things that are happening there, but the impacts certainly in terms of energy security, but food security as well, and the sort of interdependencies between the two as well. Those are really starting to come to the fore. When we think about the Ukraine and Russia, for example, 40% of the wheat production, global wheat production, comes from that part of the world. So the impacts, obviously, with what's happening out in the Ukraine, are starting to be felt already, and there will be. There was sure to be ramifications really in terms of farming and food production and availability of food, etc., here in Wales and further afield. So I'll probably leave it at that, Dawn.
Thanks for that, Peter. Really, really helpful. It's interesting, isn't it, when we have these kind of major global crises. The pandemic was clearly one of those. The war in Ukraine is another, and obviously climate emergency rolls on and on. And it makes us all think again, it really shines a spotlight on where our food comes from, and hopefully puts the food agenda to the top of people's awareness again. But it's a matter of sort of taking action. Really interesting to hear that 40% of our wheat comes from that region. There are various questions for you in the chat and a few hands up, but I wanted to pick up specifically on this question of access to land. It's been mentioned in the chat, particularly by Vicky, who's working really hard in Pembrokeshire to engage with farmers and communities around land and access to land. Vicky says that actually farmers have provided a solution for some community groups by making some land available where the council hasn't been able to do so. I wonder whether you see a role for your network or for farmers in this question about access to land for new entrants into farming or for community growing projects, and whether you've got anything that you could talk to us about on that topic.
Yeah, look, I guess this is a difficult issue, isn't it? And I think certainly, I get the feeling, or certainly those of you maybe based in Swansea, I feel a little bit that you are deprived of access to land to be able to do what you want to do. And I'm sure, there's probably a conversation there for you to have with your local authority, but potentially maybe with local farmers as well, and looking at what is available. I think that the challenge is often that the farmland is some distance away from where human population is, isn't it? Our sort of towns and cities, etc. That obviously the bulk of food production happens in rural communities. There is that challenge there. Quite interesting quite a conversation I recently had with a representative from Fair Share Cymru, who approached us. They're looking at a project, what they're calling a gleaning project. They're particularly interested in talking to sort of growers of fruit and vegetables, perhaps people who are supplying into sort of into the sort of supermarket sector, but they're looking at potentially a project whereby volunteers would be able to come in and sort of glean basically what's left in terms of the harvest after the sort of after the main harvest has been done, and certainly something we're trying to put put growers in touch with them, looking at people who work together there, and really looking at their project particularly looks at perhaps the most deprived in society, and ensuring that they trying to get them access to sort of fresh fruit and vegetables. Something that is difficult, and obviously it ticks a whole lot of boxes really in terms of when you look at the agenda in terms of sustainability, food waste, ensuring obviously that the most impoverished people in our societies have access to sort of good quality and healthy food as well. So we're keen to support Fair Share Cymru in their work with that. So
that's really, really interesting to hear. And it's that kind of joint working between volunteers and community groups and other projects with what I think of as kind of mainstream farmers. Really, really great to hear that example. And if there are opportunities for and if you are a part of any conversations where farmers are keen to engage with community organizations and with good food movements in towns and communities across our region, then we would love to connect on that. Helen, your hand has been up for a while, then Kelly, then Vicky.
Hi, thanks, Dawn. Actually, you stole my thunder when it came to a question around farmers and releasing land or working with new and entrant growers. So it's great that you asked that as well. I just wondered in the conversation with farmers, whether there's any conversation around changing farming systems or adapting perhaps to systems that maybe better address the climate and nature emergencies. So things like, in the environmental sector and community sector, we talk a lot about regenerative farming and regenerative growing. So I wondered whether that's a term that gets talked about, what that means to farmers, and also what at the moment in the discussions that you've been having are the kind of key challenges to make that transition, I think, to net zero by 2040, and to see what measures are needed to support farmers to become more efficient.
Vicky, would you like to say something?
Well, it's really, I put it in chat, but I think the need for the land around where people live, towns, villages and cities, should be completely, pigeonholed, earmarked, ring-fenced, literally, for that community to have access to meet their needs, whatever those needs may be, whether it's food growing, energy or other resources, leisure or anything else. But the land around cities and towns should be have a planning designation which keeps it just for that purpose. And that isn't impossible. That's really a cost-free exercise for government, Welsh Government. But short of that, it is an appeal really to say that if farmers we could find the motivation, find the barriers, remove the barriers, provide the motivation to make land available where people can get to it. I think that people would move heaven and earth to achieve that, because it's the most important thing we can do for people in these urban areas looking ahead. And whether it's money or working on the land or whatever, or giving them planning gain, be it what it may, I'm sure we can find the motivation, find the incentives, and remove the barriers, because we need to. And where there's determination and agreement, we always find a way.
Thank you, Vicky. So Peter, I'm sorry, I have capitalised on your presence here this morning and we are grateful. Would you be able to respond to either of those points from Vicky and Helen, particularly about the kind of systems change stuff?
Yeah, I'll do my best, Dawn. Look, I think it's important when we talk about net zero in agriculture and the sort of, we've set that sort of ambition and that target for farming to become, or agricultural production to be net zero in England and Wales by 2040. It's a national aspiration. It's not an expectation that every farm can reach net zero. Everyone's going to start that journey to net zero from a different place, and everyone is going to need a sort of a unique sort of action plan tailored to their own sort of farm and their own particular situation. But there probably isn't a single answer to the whole problem, but we've sort of broken it down in terms of three sort of broad areas or three broad headings, really. So It's looking at sort of improving farming's productive efficiency. It's also improving land management and changing land use to capture more carbon. And it's also then looking at the sort of boosting the generation of renewable energy and the sort of wider bioeconomy. So, I mean, if we look at those three things, if we look at boosting productivity and reducing emissions, for example, there's a whole lot of measures that could be used here. We could talk about things like using sort of controlled release fertilizers, increasing the sort of efficient use of nitrogen, and you could reduce emissions by doing that. You could look at sort of feed additives that you can that you give to ruminant livestock, and that reducing methane emissions through those sort of feed additives. There's a lot of interesting work being done with research being done in terms of seaweed at the moment. I think there's a company down in Pembrokeshire looking at that. It sounds simplistic in a way, but if you improve the sort of if you improve the general health of your cattle and the sheep that you're rearing, if you boost growth rates, that more efficient, that in itself is going to reduce methane emissions. There's a whole lot of other things. Precision farming, when we talk about crops, being able to sort of deliver nutrients and crop protection more efficiently and more effectively by using sort of technology and precision farming tools. A lot of farmers are already doing a lot of this. It's good for the environment. It's good for the bottom line as well. It is efficient use of resources. Looking at things like soils and looking at sort of compacted soils. There's a lot of work that can be done to loosen compacted soils in sort of in crop areas of cropland and in pastures. That then reduces the need for cultivations. It actually then minimizes the amount of nitrous oxide emissions that we have as an industry. There's things like anaerobic digestion. So you're converting animal manures and crops and byproducts of crops into renewable energy. So there's a whole host of things really that are being done and can be done, and more can be done on farming. In terms of it is about working smarter, isn't it? In terms of being able to produce the same quantity of food or even more with actually less inputs. That if we do that, we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture industry. So yeah, look, we could have a whole seminar on this. Just in terms of sort of things like regenerative farming, I suppose it is something that is being talked about a lot more. But I do think there's a lot of farmers out there who've been practicing these kind of methods for a long time. I do sometimes think it is a bit like reinventing the wheel, some of it. But I'm positive really. In terms of, I try to be positive when we look at climate change in particular. I think particularly Southwest Wales, the area we're looking at, we are likely to be an area that is not going to suffer the worst sort of aspects of climate change. We do have temperate climate. We have lots of rainfall. It can cause problems, but it also does give us opportunities, particularly in terms of sort of sustainable grass-fed livestock in particular, and dairy. I think red meat and dairy of sustainable grass-based systems. I think there's a good future for that in West Wales. I really, truly believe that.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the updates and the insight really into what NFU is doing and what your members are already doing. And some really important messages for us all to take on board. And partners will disagree and will want to see more or less of different types of farming, but it's really clear that the agenda that we're all working to is aligned, and there is great stuff happening. So it's been really important to have you here to share your update, and thank you for taking our questions so willingly. Thanks, Peter. Right, I would like to suggest that we hear from another speaker on something completely different now. We've got Alice Coleman from Planed with us. So moving to Pembrokeshire for a Pembrokeshire perspective. Planet is working on a project relating to distribution of local food and lots of other things. So I'd love to hear from you, Alice, if you're here and able to talk to us.
I am Dawn. Morning, Borodar, everybody. Nice to be here. What a great group. So many conversations, so much input. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you. So Planet, as amongst other things around tourism and heritage, and just finishing off the Leader programme, we have been awarded in October 2021. We applied to the Rural Development Programme Cooperation and Supply Chain Round 8 Fund. And we were lucky enough to be awarded funding to look at a community distribution programme across Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Pembrokeshire. So slightly bigger footprint than we would do normally in Pembrokeshire, but we felt that we could support what was already there, how we can really build capacity with this project. So let me just put it onto share screen. Is that better? Yeah. So I just wanted to share a few slides. This is us. It's always useful to put a brand to a name, isn't it? And if you see flyers knocking around on websites, this is us. This is what we're doing. So it came on the back of COVID recovery. Little did we know what else was down the line that's given us challenges, and we're in a whole new world again. So we hope the project will kind of answer some of these, or go towards supporting some of these problems that we're seeing at the moment. The model on the community food distribution is a cooperative model. It's based around volunteers. It's a really basic practical model, and I'll go through the kind of, on a practical level, what we're doing across the 3 counties. We had a stakeholder group this morning, our 3rd stakeholder groups, which is why we had to cut our stakeholder groups. There's a lot of people could come here, Dawn, so apologies if I'm repeating. But we're working with across counties with CAVs, CAVOs, the local authorities, Public Health Wales, Howells, growers, producers, all those contacts, and we're really pleased to be sharing information across those networks, which is really important to us. So if I begin, this is us, this is our flyer. You might see them about. I keep seeing them in places where we haven't put them, so it's great. News is getting out. So the idea is that communities can come together, and when we say communities, you could be a school, you could be a workplace, you could be an existing community group, it could be a new community group. It doesn't necessarily need to be a constituted group. So those community groups will have a desire to buy food on a wholesale basis, and we've committed through our funding application that food will be healthy, fresh food. So we're taking a step-by-step approach. We kind of recommend that those community groups start with fresh fruit and veg. It's an easy win in terms of distribution, in terms of there's no refrigeration needed. It's healthy, good food that we should all be promoting. So we can use local producers, growers and suppliers for that, and we may mix in wholesale supply with that. I'm not going to tell you, we only will use local supply. We potentially will need to use some wholesale supply in here as well. If we're feeding a large community group, it's likely that they'll need bigger supply. There's also so our role in that community group is facilitating that to happen. So we'll go in, do our due diligence. What's already there? Is there a shop close by? We don't want to undermine what's already happening. If there is, how can we involve them? Could they be a supplier potentially? Could they get more buying power if they're a supplier? Is there an existing food bank? Is there an existing community fridge? So I think it's really important to note that this model, money changes hands. It's not based on surplus food, and it's not an artisan food market. So we will link with those suppliers, look at the price for wholesale supply, try and keep that price as consistent as possible for that ordering cycle every week. So I have jumped around a bit there, so I will take questions after if need be. So this is us. We've got the hub, central is absolutely key. We've got suppliers. The suppliers do a one-drop shop to the hub. Volunteers will then sort that supply into bags on a pre-ordered basis. So there shouldn't be any surplus there. And then customers will come to that hub at a set time and pick up that produce. And we're hoping once a hub gets its feet under the table and supplying fruit and veg through their supplier, they might add fish, wholesale fish packs, meat packs, cheese, potentially dairy in there. So there's definitely room to grow. So that order cycle is really, really simple. The order is made, the volunteers make that order from their community, wherever that may be. The supplier takes that order, it drops off at a set time. Volunteers will sort that order, customers will pick up on the same time. So ideally, if you're using a community venue, it should be dropped, sorted, out. There's no storage, there's no keeping hold of that produce. It should be going out the door. And we try and look at those hubs in terms of where we can add value. So there may be activities happening there already. There may be parent and baby groups, there may be yoga groups. So could we time the hub to happen at that time? There's a school across the road, for example. How do we link them? Who's supplying the school? Could we get more buying power through the school? How do we do it at school time potentially? Could there be footfall from the parents there who want to buy fresh produce from us? So there's lots of value adding activity going on. Our focus is those volunteers and making sure that they have a really good experience, that they're on a rota basis, that they're rewarded for their work and recognised for their work in terms of training, that it's enjoyable for them and for whatever motivations that they have to be there, that we maintain that cycle. And I think that we are using the volunteer model at the moment. We've had some queries on how is that sustainable. I think during that pilot we'll find out, and it may be that the model can be tweaked in future, that we have some other kind of additional jobs in there. We'll see, but I'll always share information with you. We always ask communities what their ideal hub looks like, what's in it for them, what's important to them. Is it local food? Is it really local food and that's what they want and they're prepared to pay a bit more, a bit less, whatever that looks like? Is it purely price led? And we are targeting low income families here. Is it purely price led? So where do we get the best value food without undercutting what's already happening? So it's up to that community, and it's important that we give them choice on what they want. They're running it, they're consuming it. It's really key that we give them that choice. This is an example, happy to share this with you. It's a case study we've done with actually a community co-op set up in Freeth in North Wales. They've been going for over 10 years. I happen to know the supplier there, Alan Hewson. He's a field scale veg grower. He also buys in wholesale, and he's been their supplier for 10 years, and the volunteers have been there doing it for 10 years. And actually it's enabled them to keep their hall open. It's enabled them to run a community cafe, which has funded a new roof on that hall. It's enabled them to do more activities. They always have a turnover of volunteers. They manage their volunteers really well. And Alan's got a fantastic relationship with them and gives them best value through his produce. And it's an interesting point. People often ask us, well, how do you compete? How do you compete with Lidl? How do you compete with Aldi? Firstly, we're a really different model. We have social added value activities happening. So we're not a supermarket. We hope to engage people and keep them coming back week after week and engage people in other activities. And I said to Alan one day over a jam sandwich and a cup of tea, I said, Alan, what's the difference then? Why do we buy from you and not Lidl? And he said, well, it's an interesting point. I'm growing, locally, and people want local food. I've got a relationship with the people at the hub now, so they want to support me. But he said, actually, I offer better value. He said, you may see loss leaders in those supermarkets. You may see carrots for 19p, but what are they pricing their apples at? What are they pricing their apples at? He said, and I know that often I'm better value. So, and that was a real kind of eye-opener for me. Of course, it's so obvious, isn't it? But he was really confident that he was offering better value, and he could see where that produce was going into. He gets direct feedback of what they like and what they don't like. So it's been a really, really sustainable relationship. It's a really lovely model. What's next? Well, we're early days. We've had online Q&A sessions with community groups, which have converted directly into expressions of interest. We're working with some schools who are doing growing projects who potentially want to increase produce coming in and setting up a food hub. We're working with community venues, all sorts of people. So we've got really solid expressions of interest there, and we're just developing those leads now. It takes time when you're looking at community groups. It always takes time to create engagement. It takes time to find out what else is happening. They need to speak to trustees. Can they get the venue? They need to get the volunteers. So there's lots of little things in the cog to make it work. And sometimes those expressions of interest won't convert to a food hub, but we'll work with them to see how they can make those steps in the future in, say, 6 months, where they've got a better venue, they've got volunteers, so we can work with them to facilitate that happening. And I think it's also, just to finish, it's making sure that we complement what's already there. You know, how do we give people a choice? How do we work with Fair Share potentially? Fair Share is a surplus model. It's completely different to what we're doing. How do we signpost to each other? How do we work with Hubbub and the community fridges? We've got a really good relationship with them. Logistically, they've got fridges. So is there a point there that we could kind of connect with them and do some complementary work there? So there's lots and lots of opportunities. We're still early days, but lots of opportunities. So thank you. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Alice. Wow, that's a really, really interesting project. And hopefully there will be some reflections and questions. This idea of food hubs and empowering volunteers to bring food hubs into their local communities seems really, really interesting. And as you were saying, when you were talking about that particular case study with Alan, if it can be affordable, high quality produce locally, as much locally sourced as possible, but actually affordable and good value for people, then it strikes me that that's the game changer, isn't it? And it's getting that perception across to people that it is as affordable or better value than perhaps some of the supermarkets, which would really shift people's thinking.
Absolutely. And at the moment when we're watching the petrol pumps, having a really local food hub in your community is I think really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really, really interesting. Happy to take any comments, any hands up if colleagues would like to ask a question or make a comment on that. Sue, lovely to see you. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, Alice, I'm interested how you gather the customers really more than the actual volunteers, because where I lived previously, we crowdfunded and set up a local community refill shop. And in the beginning, we had huge support. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of that ringing tone. We had huge support from our local community to crowdfund the project, and lots of people came for the first few months and they were really interested. And we did exactly the same as you. We said, if you shop across our range, we will be cheaper. You know, we can't sell pasta for the same price as Sainsbury's, but if you look at everything else that we sell, you will be better value. But unfortunately, that initial enthusiasm, we just couldn't sustain it. People stopped coming because they're so used to shopping in the supermarket. So what do you do to actually try and get that message out? How do we get that message out? Because, you know, we're always talking to the same small group of people who've already got an interest in their food. It's the people who haven't got that interest already, who just go to the supermarket and don't even think that there's any other way to shop. Like that's the big challenge, I think.
It is a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I think, gosh, if I knew the answer, I might be a squillionaire by now. But I think it's, we do our due diligence with those communities. And I think you're right. We say to those communities, is there a demand here? How does that demand look? And that could be from school, it could be from a workplace, it could be. And those communities know those customers best. They know who's around them. So what can we do to tap into that? And how do we kind of keep that engagement? I can't bottle that and answer it. I don't know. I think it's kind of being relevant. I think we are probably going to be very relevant with all the other stuff going on, the perfect storm that we've got at the moment with food and food supplies, and keeping communication on that, which is really difficult because we're not going to be here to drive that forever. That's down to those volunteers to really sell that to their communities and get buy-in from the beginning. And keep shouting about it, keep sharing the case studies, keep sharing what works, keep engagement in terms of education around how you use the food. You know, if we get a Swede in the veg bag every week, gosh, that's going to be a challenge. So how do you use it? What do you do with it? How do you store it? How do you share it? Split it up with a neighbour? So I think we're going to have a lot of work in terms of being creative and keeping that engagement there and keeping that momentum going. And that's why we empower and engage our volunteers so much, because they're absolutely critical, because they're the face of those hubs. So I think by investing in those, we can only hope that happens. And it's happening in people's, it's in people's communities. So then, we'd hope that there's a desire there, but I can't answer how we keep that momentum up. It's a real challenge. When I find out, I'll let you know.
It strikes me that when you're talking about communities, and perhaps we're all thinking about a village or something like that, but somewhere like Swansea University would be a community, wouldn't it? That people come to work every day on campus at Swansea University, and that the university might think, well, let's set ourselves up a food hub for staff and students.
Exactly. And we're fortunate that we've just recruited the student union coordinator from the Lampeter campus there, and we're looking at exactly that. We're looking at how it fits in with curriculums in schools, with maths, with health and well-being, and putting toolkits together for that. So, how can it start to be part of the curriculum? There's loads of opportunities here.
And big workplaces, like places like the DVLA in Swansea, where people are already going, presumably people are back in the office at work in lots of places. Because I think to Sue's point about the convenience of shopping in supermarkets, and I often think that, food hubs and local producers have got a big job on their hands to be as convenient as the supermarkets. And really, really interesting to think differently about what we mean by communities and going to places where people already are and trying to meet the needs that they say they have. So I love the model, Alice, really, really interesting. Any other questions or comments specifically on this? I think that's quite inspiring for us to think about. Jack?
Hello. Sorry, I had to step out. So I actually missed quite a bit of the food hubs, which is a bit annoying because that's where my expertise lies. I think I massively, I've run Farmco now for 5 years, and I think if for those of you who don't know, we run it's essentially a food hub. We kind of remarketed it as an online farm shop because I think when you start to I always think about the end user experience, and so I'm thinking of what does the customer want. When you start talking about hubs and points and stuff like that, it gets a bit tricky, and sometimes people confuse us with food banks, etc., etc. So we remarketed it as an online farm shop, but essentially a food hub, run in Swansea for 5 years, previously Swansea Food Assembly, and then we created Farmco in 2018, but we've used the same producers. I think I haven't actually finished my note on the chat, but I was saying it has been incredibly hard to run, and the difficulty we've experienced, and I speak to a lot of people who run food hubs, is actually getting people to shop on there. And so you have to spend a lot of time and effort making the website look good, making it really practical and really easy, and then you sort of have to go down the lines of, or from our point of view, we've had to go down all the kind of same marketing routes as a normal business would: online adverts, customer retention, so trying to get them people who haven't shopped for a while back with 10% off, and it becomes tricky because we can't really afford to give people 10% off because the margins aren't there within that. The collectiveness of getting producers together, we decided to keep the control in-house, e.g. the stock, pictures, because when you put that control onto the producers, what you find is different levels of continuity. Some people want to update their stock. Some producers, wouldn't take a good enough photo to make that product look appetizing enough for someone to buy. It's a lifelong work, and that's actually led me into this role now at the council, where I think, just to give you a background, I'm still running Farmco in the background part-time, and we've got a manager who runs it full-time now. And then I'm obviously concentrating on the local food coordinator job. But yeah, I'm happy to, I think, not that I've given some sort of negative things about, because my head's been in it for 5 years, but it's definitely an amazing model. And I think it's just really trying to get people to shop with you. Just to give you, last year we turned over £120,000 on it. And that was the pandemic. So you have it was quite easy to run in a pandemic because, well, not easy to run, but people were looking elsewhere. They didn't want to go to supermarkets, etc. Now coming out of it, they've all disappeared. I don't mind sort of sharing our Sketty collection used to turn over £2,000 a week. We got one today, it's on £200. That's the drop. And that's the realities of whether it's coming out of the pandemic and people don't want to shop like that anymore and they've gone back to their old routines, put a war in there and rising costs. And it's been really difficult. So we're at a stage now where Leah, who's managing it, and myself part-time, we're looking at changing the model again to kind of keep up with current times and try and make it even more convenient, whether that's a shop or the click and collect side of it and the shop. We don't know yet. We're in those talks, but it's really tricky because we literally, and it's a bit of an annoying that we work all the way through a pandemic non-stop, and people, they go back to their old habits. And we've got a busy life now. I've got a new job. We've got 2 young children, and I find myself shopping less on my own food hub and going elsewhere because I'm running around like a headless chicken every day, trying to pick children up from nursery and trying to feed everyone. So it's a really tricky model, but I'm really happy to share. Anyone who's, I'm sorry, I missed a lot of the talks in.
That's all right. They're all recorded, Jack. So
yeah, I'll go back through that. But anyone who I've heard a lot of talks in the background of food hubs. My Farmco email, I'll put that in there as well, is jack@farmco.wales. And out of work's time, then I'm happy to meet or respond to anyone who wants to share my experience. But I do think they're really, really good. I think and this is going back into my food coordinator role, sorry to confuse everyone, but I think there needs to be a massive marketing push personally. And I know I'm thinking in business here, and I know there's a lot of sort of groups and CICs about, but I generally think to get those people in, we need to go, we need a massive marketing push. And just to finish up, I know Elizabeth's on here, and excuse my terminology on this, but I know Elizabeth came to us, Westaway came to us with is it the brick, Elizabeth, I can't remember, but it measures the density of the nutrients and etc. And we were thinking, why don't we do a massive marketing campaign online where we're going, this is an organic apple, or this is a organic carrot grown in Gower, and this is a carrot from Tesco's. Boom, boom. There we are. You've got your nutrients in there. You've got less nutrients in there. You've got chemicals in there. So I'm really like, I think we really need to make a massive push to the masses. And I'm talking from, access to markets and outlets here, but we essentially need to get people shopping like this and realizing, if we're not supporting local farmers, these guys are going to, with the rising costs at the moment, I'm just talking to people who are literally, what Tom O'Kane said in the Bywd Abertawe talk, that he's knowing a lot of people who've just taken the year off growing veg because it's just not worth their while. I know bakers who are going to stop next week because the prices have gone up so much, and people aren't buying them, and they're going, oh, it's £3 too expensive for a sourdough loaf, an organic sourdough loaf. I'm just going to go and buy my Hovis for 58p, and we'll be stopping his business next week because we are in, I'll say what Jeff said at the beginning. It's a really, really tricky time, but from that and from these sort of, if we move quickly and if we can shorten these food chains, and if people can work together, we can sort of keep these really small businesses afloat. Sort of, we can really showcase these food hubs and these little food shops, like someone's just mentioned on the chat about Popples. So sorry for the long-winded rant on it, but it is.
Thank you, Jack. It's definitely really great to hear your insights, having run that food hub and the model that you've got of locally sourced and really great quality produce. And I think when we hear from people like Jack who are in it running these businesses, you hear that frustration, don't you, and exhaustion. You know, there's really a lot of burnout in the system from small producers doing their best to buck the trend and to provide alternative options and to meet that demand from those of us that do want the healthy local produce. But it sounds exhausting and quite thankless. And I think there's a job for all of us to do in working harder to support those local enterprises. And, you know, that idea of a marketing campaign, I think, is really important, isn't it? We've got to create the customer base and the demand in the mainstream markets for this produce to support those businesses to develop and grow, either volunteer-led food hubs or enterprise-based hubs. Sue, did you want to come in again?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really that, you know, when we talk about the role of, you know, the council and places that are already, you know, the sort of officialdom, and there's a lot of a push now to try and encourage people, local producers and things. But, you know, the big thing is to make sure that market exists for them, isn't it? And, you know, the thing that is worrying for me is that we spend an awful lot of time thinking about how we're going to set up things to provide a service to people, but we haven't thought enough, I don't think, about how we get those people. You know, the supermarkets are so good at marketing themselves, aren't they? And, you know, we had exactly the same experience as Jack. You know, through the pandemic, we were absolutely overrun with people. We had so many people coming and queuing up outside our shop that we couldn't even, you know, we just couldn't manage it. Now we are only open 3 days a week. So, you know, it's just not possible at the moment to get through to enough people, I don't think, to be able to, I mean, you know, like we're talking to the chat from the NFU, the farmers are only going to move their practices if they know that the customers exist that will buy the stuff. You know, it's no good telling a farmer that they need to change to regenerative agriculture if at the end of that, nobody's buying it, you know, if they're still going off to Tesco's. So that, I think, is our biggest challenge.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, really important. And when we look at the Sustainable Food Places network, and they've got sort of 6 action areas or themes that come out of becoming a sustainable food place. And the one that's always really interesting to me is that idea of a good food movement and creating active food citizens. And we just need more and more people to place a higher priority on the question of where their food comes from. And Jack gave a little plug for Elizabeth Westaway's work at Griffin, Growing Real Food for Nutrition, which is a really great way of visualizing the difference between, you know, sustainably and regeneratively produced food and the nutritional value that comes from that, helping people see that cheap food isn't the same. It's not the same carrot that you're eating. But yes, growing the demand, creating awareness, making more and more people into advocates and campaigners for good food. What can we do collectively to encourage that? Brilliant. Well, that was a really great presentation and very thought-provoking and inspiring from Alice at Planed. And Planed seem uniquely well positioned to pull together the right people in communities and businesses and producers. And you mentioned the health board as well there, Alice. So we'd be really grateful if you'll keep us updated, and hopefully we'll hear some great success stories from volunteer-led hubs around Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire that we can learn from. But I think partners were also really keen. If you could just reiterate who was the case study you were talking about. Was it a North Wales project with Alan?
Yeah, it's North Wales. It's up in Frith. Yeah, North Wales. I'm happy to share the case study. That's no problem at all.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Thank you, Alice. Thanks for your update. That's been really, really insightful and helpful. One more person that I'd like to put on the spot, Andrew Thomas. You've been joining for the meeting, and I'll take the opportunity while you're here. But Andrew Thomas is here on behalf of the Welsh Government, and we wanted to offer you 5 minutes, Andrew, to update the group. I'm sure we'd all find it interesting and useful to hear the perspective of the government on all of this, and any reflections that you'd like to share on what you've heard so far this morning, Andrew.
Cheers for that, Dawn. Yeah, I think, I mean, just to sort of set my role in context. my role is I manage the cluster programme within the food division of Welsh Government, and I also, for my sins, relationship manage the food processors in the southwest region. So 2 sort of hats on from that perspective. So today really is just understanding what is sort of going on in the region, and then hoping that I could input as well in some ways as to, my knowledge of the sector and the industry at the moment. And I can see a lot of our partners on the call as well, who are heavily engaged at the moment. It's been absolutely brilliant to hear what is going on. I think that going forward as well, Dawn, it would be useful for some of our policy colleagues maybe to join this call as well. And again, we got an agricultural department, but our remit and my policy colleagues' remit is on the food production, sort of the food processing element as well, or majority of. In terms of sort of, and again, it's been spoken about quite a bit this morning. The current state of the industry obviously impacted quite significantly on the war in Ukraine, and we're seeing a lot of price rises that are sort of happening across the board. It's a daily occurrence at the moment that we're getting companies contacting us to stress the sort of the issues that they're facing at the moment in terms of price rises on ingredients, the availability of ingredients, and everything else that's impacting them, especially around the energy prices. So it's a bit of a perfect storm at the moment in that regard. So it's the farmers and people sort of know this more than most. The fertilizer costs alone have increased significantly to just over £1,000 a tonne at the moment, and that will have an impact on the food production. I think again we've heard here about how the processors are sort of, and some of the producers are looking at what they can produce and what they will produce in terms of that margin, because it's just not there anymore when you factor in all the energy increases. But one of the main things that has come about from all this as well, energy aside, and the additional costs, is the skills gap as well in food processing, and these skills, and the number of vacancies in the sector. We're currently, despite all the issues and companies really struggling, there are significant shortages of staff due to the migration, or the sort of the return of a lot of the Eastern European workforce. So it's impacting on a lot of the companies there. Food inflation, I think we were predicting about a 7% increase in food inflation, but I think that is a complete underestimate about where we're looking at now. And I know Richard, I can see Richard on the call there from one of our partners in Food and Drink Wales there. And Richard knows more than most, with the work that he's doing about the situations with the companies and the inflationary increases that, in effect, hasn't really passed on to us consumers yet through the retailers, in all honesty. You've seen already that the retailers have increased their prices slightly in some areas, maybe not across the board, but with the war in Ukraine and everything else that's going on, energy prices, there's another increase that's going to be coming across the board. Now, with that comes opportunities for local produce, and I think that's where we really need to look at. The marketing has been suggested, and I think that maybe the starting point, and I think somebody that said, I think there was I know Planet have the Swansea guys, the commercial guys earlier, about mapping what is currently grown, what can be grown. And I'm aware of Monmouthshire Council as well that have done quite a significant amount of work on that. And I think that would be really useful, and something maybe sort of a chance to those that have sort of, in that area is, why is it that those
Thank you so much, Andrew. And you know, we're real believers that we've got to have the whole system in the room. And as you say, it would be great to have policy colleagues joining future discussions, because we definitely want to make sure that we're joining up and feeding into policy as much as everything. Would anyone like to ask any specific questions of Andrew at this point? Or reflect on anything else that you've heard. Richard, you've been sitting at the top of my screen there, and you keep being mentioned and you're active in the chat. I don't know whether there's anything you'd like to reflect on.
Yeah, sure, Dawn, thank you. I think picking up on Andrew's point there, it's making this all work together in terms of a cycle. In you know, there's the supply there from the producers, from the farm hubs, but it's driving people's awareness and their demands. So I think tailored to that is like Andrew touched on there, some of the work we're doing is trying to engage with businesses, whether that be retailers and hospitality and food service businesses, so that they understand that there is a demand and this underlying value of Welshness, that people want it. It will drive customer footfall across a wide range of demographics, not just the more affluent. And that in turn, if that starts driving demand and awareness, that will just cascade across the piece as a whole. And I think that will help provide the stimulus and the momentum to really start getting a lot of the points we're talking about today a lot more active and effective. You know, it's a really complex puzzle, it's a really complex system, obviously. So I think it's just all these moving parts working with as much synchronization as possible to take us forward as quickly as we can.
Thank you for that. Yes, the hospitality and retail sectors are massively important, and it definitely came out of the previous discussion that, you know, what we can all do in terms of asking the question when we're at the bar, you know, have you got any local gin? But from asking where their gin comes from to asking for local produce in shops and restaurants.
And I think I just touch on that, Dawn. I think, you know, that's part of the work we're trying to do, is also to educate those businesses that a lot of them may be stocking local products, but they're not actually marketing that. They're not actually putting that in front of those customers to the point that they recognise that that piece of meat has come from the butcher on the gower, that those vegetables are locally produced and sourced, and that's why they taste so good. And there are some real exemplar businesses out there. You know, you take the Warren in Carmarthen, and they're absolutely fantastic the way they source and illustrate the provenance of their products, and that when you eat that food, you really notice the difference. And I think there's a lot of businesses out there that we can help to educate and inform, which in turn will help to educate and inform the customers.
Brilliant. Great to hear that work is ongoing. Thank you, Richard. Augusta, will you come in?
Hi. Yeah, I was just kind of reflecting on the sort of impediments that small scale producers have faced to date with the subsidy system that we've had And I don't know if this is an area of Andrew's kind of expertise really, or anybody else who might be at the meeting, but I feel like with the new emerging information that's coming out about the replacement subsidies, it will be really key as to whether holdings under 5 acres, so sort of bio-intensive horticulture particularly, will be eligible for financial support or not, because I think that's really holding Welsh fruit and veg production back at the moment. So I just don't know if anybody has anything to say on that, including Andrew. Thank you.
Not my area of expertise, sorry, Augusta, but maybe Pete will know a little bit more from the Farm Farmers Union's perspective. But the from a replacement scheme for the RDP from food processing and the like, then that's where sort of my knowledge is, and that's being developed as we speak, and will be a replacement for the food business investment scheme and the rural business investment scheme that is ongoing, and come the end of this period now that will be launched. So yeah, maybe apologies, but yeah, I can go back and ask agricultural colleagues, but unless Pete knows a little bit more than myself.
Thank you for that, and we'll make sure my colleague Evie is taking notes of everything that's being discussed. So it's an interesting question to ask about the eligibility of small scale farmers for support. Peter, you have unmuted. Have you got any insight on that?
Yeah, just I'm aware that obviously under the current basic payment scheme, eligibility, there's a minimum of 5 hectares of land. So you mean Augusta's point is relevant there really in terms of, but that's for BPS. I think there are obviously lots of other streams of funding available through the RDP. But that's obviously just what I'm quoting there is just for the BPS. But clearly, obviously, we're moving towards this new sustainable farming scheme over the next few years. We will be transitioning over to that. There may be opportunities there, but obviously, I think you probably need to get in the ear of Welsh Government on that one.
We do, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Vicky.
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought I was muted. So there's a couple of things. One is that the regulations are acting as a barrier for horticulture locally. For example, planning permission for polytunnels, which has slowed down 2 businesses significantly who had markets locally for their produce. And that's something that possibly Welsh Government could look at, finding some sort of motor development where there is a local market demand for the produce and within criteria, obviously. That was one question. And I will actually wanted to find some farmers to come and speak to our Sia Zero event in Pembrokeshire, but I'll do that as a direct message, not to take up your time. So it's to do with the regulations, and there's also plenty of other regulations which could be tweaked to enable access to more land to grow for communities. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and it's making me think that we should have more of a policy focus in a future conversation. We'll liaise with Andrew and line up some policy colleagues from Welsh Government and make sure that we have the right expertise in the room to have that discussion about specific policy changes or regulations or specific asks from those smaller scale horticulturalists about support and the barriers that we've been discussing.
Yeah, can I just say,
oh yes, sorry.
Very quickly, just to say yes, exactly, because in 2020, Welsh Government made community horticulture growing permitted development within criteria, and that's one of the reasons we've got these 2, well, particularly one of the sites, because it would have been challenged otherwise. So it works. So when people make it permitted development, it has results.
Fantastic. That's really great to understand. Thank you, Vicky. Jeff.
Hi, yes, just following on from what Andrew was talking about in particular, and Peter also, is that I think everybody's aware in the farming industry, and probably Welsh Government as well, that we're going into a very difficult time. The next 10, 15 or 20 years are really quite unpredictable in terms of global supply chains, and so on and so forth. So food supplies, it's not going to be a matter of really availability of food. It's going to be distribution. of that food that's going to be the big problem. So as a community-based group, we're championing local food, but without the ability to work with existing farmers, we want to be a part of the solution to farming generally. We don't want to be on the edges trying to get a polytunnel up, in this sort of thing. We're the link between the people on the ground and the groundswell and the wasted resources that aren't being employed by Welsh Government locally to try and just gain access to land, but in a way that actually helps the existing farmers to have a more viable future. If we have to reduce dairy herds, then what are we doing with some of that pasture land? Can it be brought into vegetable production? Can we grow our own grains? Can we grow our own feed? Can we have local markets? Can we move in that direction? I'm talking about 15 to 20 years. This is not going to be something we can sort out quickly, but it's an opportunity for Welsh Government in particular, I think, to really have a vision of a long-term future. Where do we hope to be in 50 years vis-a-vis our own food supply in this country? How are we going to deal with the health issues if we don't address, obvious faults in the food system that we allow because they're still profitable? We have to turn to a more quality-based approach and get out of this quantity-based, export-based, large-scale supermarket-dominated system, because it's simply not working for real people.
Thank you, Jeff. Important points. Tony, you put your hand up there. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think, sorry, I've missed that last presenter, but I can hear from the conversations probably what the theme was. I suppose I want to give a shout out really, because the public sector especially are trying to do things at the moment, and that's funded by Welsh Government. And what the project I'm working on, CAKE, is Circular Economy Innovation Communities, is bringing cohorts of people from lots of different organisations together to work on solutions to, I suppose, reduce the impact of the climate emergency. That's basically in the general theme we're working on, circular economy. So I think what I've just discussed with a colleague about a cohort that's kicking off in September in Swansea Bay region, and that one already was lined up as a theme around, say, public sector supply chains. What you're talking about here is economic. And the spend, you've got to look at where's the money coming from in economics. I don't know. So one of the biggest spends in South West Wales is the public sector. So I suppose what I'm saying is CAKE's got a platform there for public sector organisations to come along and consider how they're spending their funds. But also, it's not just public sector organisations; it's people in public services. So CAVs are at the table here. I can see Welsh Government at the table. All of the public service organisations can come along to a CAKE and look at a specific challenge. And that includes third sector as well. So I'm just making that invitation that there may be a platform available in September where you can focus on challenges which we basically work through a design process, so you come up with a solution at the end of it. And some colleagues on the call here are already on the programme. I just want to make that opportunity available.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Tony, didn't you say you were doing a food cohort, Tony?
Exactly that, Zoe. We are in September. But it's basically, we've got the broad theme of public sector supply chain, but 80-90% of that is, well, it's probably not 89%, but it's a big proportion of that is going to be their food spend. Just to give you an example of what we're doing, the first cohort is Carmarthenshire County Council and Swansea County Council working together. And one of the big things that's changed within the leisure department in Carmarthenshire, they're actually looking for local food supply chains as a result of the cake programme. So we can sort of affect things. So that September cohort is food focused, but it's supply chain focused at the end of the day. We've got to keep our themes big, because we're sort of funded. We've only got limited number of programmes, and we're funded by Welsh Government to try and shift big bits of work, you know, of which I think a big part of the supply chain is food. And we had Simon Wright speaking for us at a cohort recently in the webinar I've put in the chat, and he was talking about local food for the public plate. So we're sort of supporting that activity as well. So if anybody's interested, just give me a shout.
Thank you, Tony. We'll stay connected with that because it's really relevant. And I know a lot of work in Carmarthenshire in particular is going on around the public plate. So it's great to hear about that focused cohort coming up. Rhys James, your hand is up. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks. Tony, I'd be really interested in joining that thing. Sounds really good. I'm from Caerphilly Council, so just outside your region, but Caerphilly been appointed as lead on the WLGA food procurement network. So we're taking forward all of the public sector food procurement for Mid, West and South Wales. So it's a big area covering all of the schools, leisure centres and all public sector. So there's everyone's involved from council point of view. There's Natural Resources Wales that are looking to join us. Transport for Wales, we got a couple of housing sector housing associations joining us as well. So there's a big push for us to do this sort of thing. And I've sort of just been listening today just to see what's going on. I did join the 1 October. But there's more of a push now because of the universal free school meals rollout that's coming in September. And it was a specific statement made that'll include more local produce, and we're trying to figure out how that fits in with what we do with public sector purchasing. So Tony's event sounds really good because that's the sort of thing we're looking at doing. But the talk today has been around sort of small scale stuff and things like that. Our remit is massive. It's not to the scale where Tony just said that, you know, it's got a massive influence, because we don't see it as having a massive influence because the supermarkets are the ones with the influence, not us, you know. But we can drive major change in the industry with what we do. And we've worked with the Foundation Economy team in Welsh Gov and members of Food and Drink Wales, and the policy teams and all of these people, and we're involved in lots of different working groups, and there's working groups on working groups at the moment, and there's another one coming up I think tomorrow that Lada Cymru are running and doing the same. Everyone's doing the same sort of thing. So I think my point is we just need to drive and focus on making sure we all do the same thing, because at the moment I sit on probably 10 different working groups, from Claire's groups to Welsh Government groups to this, and we're all talking about similar things and doing things in a similar way, but we need somebody to drive that centrally, and I'm not sure who that is, but I'll sort of stick my hand up and say we need somebody to do it, but I'm not sticking my hand up and say I'll do it, but I'll just keep trying to link people together.
Thanks, Rhys. It's really, really great to hear about the WLGA Food Procurement Network. And it's the useful thing about these meetings. We hope that it emerges lots of new information and connections and contacts for people in the room. You know, as a community interest company ourselves, with no funding to host these sorts of conversations at all, For the Region is serving as a space creator, so just creating space for these conversations to happen. And we see through meetings like this and other conversations that we're part of that huge amounts of good work is happening in silos, and exactly as you say there, Rhys, what can we do to bring people together and join up all that good work. And at meetings like this, which are open access, open to everybody, from residents and members of the community to businesses and larger organisations, you know, people can really have their voice heard and hear what's going on. And the trouble with a lot of organisations is those conversations aren't benefiting from the wealth of knowledge and expertise and passion that exists in communities within businesses and other parts of the system. So we're really such believers in the importance of whole system conversations and having these discussions together openly, involving whoever wants to be part of them. So if we can play a small role ourselves in helping to join the dots, you know, we're glad to do so, and really grateful to those of you who come along and share information about what's happening within your organisations so that we can help to make those connections. Right, we're aiming to close this meeting in about 20 minutes, but what I would like to suggest for the last 20 minutes of the discussion today is that we go into short 10-minute breakout rooms and invite small group conversations, just a bit of action planning or prioritization, really, based on everything that you've heard today, and obviously on the back of what I've just said of our role for the region, where we're trying to join up conversations and enable collaboration with very little resources ourselves. What shall we focus on collectively across the region? Lots of ideas have been mentioned today, and we've captured all of those. Shout out to my colleague Evie, who's rapidly scribbling notes as everything gets said. But in your small groups, I would really like you to have a conversation about what shall we do? Where shall we focus our efforts most beneficially? Those of us that are part of this network, within our own organisations, what collaborations could we work on together over the next few months? We'll reconvene again, no doubt, in 6 months' time. What shall we do? So you'll go into a small group. It's a 10-minute breakout. So again, no long introductions. Focus on the question of what are the priorities that we can work on together? What shall we do? And I'll bring you back in here in about 10 minutes' time. Hey, welcome back. I think that's everybody back from your breakout rooms. Very brief and hopefully to the point. But in the last 10 minutes, it would be great to hear some feedback from your groups. What shall we do? Thank you, Mary, for putting your hand up first. What shall we do?
We had a bit of a rant about the political system and about the importance of food education, which concluded that a group such as this, a collective such as this, is a good resource for perhaps, I wouldn't say lobbying education providers necessarily, but to say that the new curriculum in Wales provides an opportunity for schools and colleges to be a lot more flexible about the way that they approach these topics, and that a lot of them are now very open to more holistic and creative resources, things that, and so Kelly recommended a book that, she mentioned a book that her friend had written that's all about how you can teach basic essential skills like maths, what have you, while learning about healthy food and growing and stuff like that. And I think because of the new curriculum, schools are at that point where they're open to those kinds of suggestions. So, and there are also regional bodies governing education. So perhaps we collectively could say, please use the new curriculum to be creative about teaching food-related skills and growing skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So yeah, engaging with the education system and with schools. Thanks for that. Helen from NRW, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, in our group, then we kind of focused on something that was mentioned at the start of the event is, you know, there's a lot that's going on. How do we keep track of it? Can we have a directory or better map it out so we can see who's doing what, at what level, whether it's strategic, you know, whether it's local growing projects, whatever it might be. So have maybe some kind of way of sorting them out so we can better see what's going on, maybe then identify the gaps, identify the good practice and case studies that could be scaled up or duplicated, because we might already have loads of solutions. In fact, we know we have because we've talked a lot about them, but how do we implement them on the ground? I think Augusta was saying that the Sustainable Food Places Coordinators Network that's forming in Wales is a really useful place to have those discussions as well. And then also, I was kind of saying that I think we need to evidence our need better. What is the ask, whether that's particularly around land? What do we need land for? Where? Why? Who's going to do it? Have we got the skills? Is the market there? Communities involved? Are we really considering things holistically? So I think maybe that's something for me. And then what was it? Sharing opportunities and barriers, and having discussions with public bodies about the change that's needed. Not sure if I missed anything out from my group.
Great. That was a good list there. And I appreciated as well, you know, you're taking away some potential actions for yourself. So there may be others in the group that have got things that you can work on and report back, or ideas and priorities that have emerged from this discussion.
Sorry, can I just add to that, Dawn? And I think, you know, we're kind of asking, do we need to get funding to resource these activities? I wanted to reflect that actually we might already have resource, particularly within this forum or similar forums, to do things like mapping and directories. So if we could come forward, I suppose, and offer that.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. And Jack was saying that part of his role is going to be mapping, and obviously CAVs are doing mapping as part of their project. Likewise, yeah, other organisations already doing mapping. So can we join up and use the resources that already exist? That would be great. Who else would like to share any reflections from your small group conversations? What shall we do? Priority areas or ideas for action? Margot.
We think use the opportunity of the priority for free school meals for primary schools to get better quality food into the primary schools. And I hear what Chris and Tony were saying from the CEIC cake, and we'll look to them to see if they've got some chances there. And Ross from Garrison Farm mentioned he had a lot of experience with logistics, so maybe we can at least get a few case studies moving on good food for primary schools.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's education coming up again, and engagement with schools. There are some really interesting projects happening, so we'll see how we can hook into them. And yeah, very aware that there are people in this meeting who we haven't heard from at all. So if you're one of those, final encouragement, put your hands up and share your reflections.
Andrew said something really interesting at the end of our meeting. Andrew, give it a sorry to quote you here, Andrew, but he said a huge issue that's right on our doorstep in terms of time is poverty, food poverty. There's a couple of things there. Wales doesn't feed itself, and basically people who haven't got the income to buy food that is becoming more and more expensive because we don't feed ourselves. It's a massive issue, yeah.
And the sort of whole conversation around cost of living and the cost of living crisis, and somebody made a point earlier on that starts to swing the balance or the focus back to how we can feed ourselves. Yes, food poverty, and as Elizabeth often says, nutrition security equally as important. Sally, is that a raised hand there? Will you comment?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
I'm agreeing because I deal with a food share and a food discount shop, and we are having so much trouble getting fresh food in that the reason why I came on here is because I want to know more about allotment schemes and everything, because I've been waiting on our local council for an allotment since 2016 for the charity, because I had a feeling something like this was coming and I wanted to be prepared. But the problem is there's no available land or waiting list available in Port Talbot, and we're getting so many food banks up and running in the area that we're all suffering with the lack of food. I'm worried about the health of our community, because good food means good mental health. And I'm starting a mental health hub, and I need everything connected because people are in so much pain here, financially, physically and mentally. Something needs to be done in the Neath Port Talbot area. Desperately.
I'm really glad to hear from you, Sally, because we haven't heard enough about Neath Port Talbot this morning, which is very much obviously one of our 4 counties in Southwest Wales. So thank you for speaking up. And, you know, connecting community growing projects with food banks, and back to the same issue of making land available for volunteers in communities to grow food. So really, really important message there. And we will connect better with Neath Port Talbot and see whether we can bring in further insight and connections about what's happening in Neath Port Talbot. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, so much. Sean, nice to hear from you.
Sorry, I couldn't find where to put my hand up. Apologies. Right, it's there. I think there needs to be a bit more focus on the whole carbon net zero thing, because some local authorities are everyone's trying to do their bits, and everyone's got their strategy, and how they actually achieve it is yet to be seen. Or even if local authorities via Welsh Government, the pressure from Welsh Government could arrange for schools, for example, or education bodies to do a life cycle analysis on the food used by the school. So if you're going to start looking at the carbon benefits of using the locally sourced goods, it adds a lot of pressure. And when you start seeing in tons of CO2 saved and all the rest of the benefits, I think that's got quite a big part to play in it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really important point there, and interesting to consider. You know, if we can really articulate the benefits better about why buy local, why grow local. We've talked a bit about the nutritional benefits of it, but if we can identify and calculate the figures relating to carbon savings, then perhaps that just adds that other tick in the box for organisations to address the provision of local food as part of their net zero strategies. That's your point there, Sean, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I've seen it coming from the recycling industry. When there's a league table on local authorities of tons of CO2 from school meals or whatever it is, it plays a big part in commitment to funds as well.
Great. Well, Evie, make a note of that, helping schools track the carbon footprint of school meals, and addressing that at different levels. That would be a really interesting piece of work. Thank you, Sean. Useful. Who else will pipe up? What shall we do? Final comment? I think I've exhausted all of your ideas and contributions already this morning. It's been a long 2.5 hour session, so thank you so much for bearing with us throughout this morning's discussion. I found it really useful. I hope others have too. It's important just to keep reconnecting as a region. Somebody said earlier on, I think it was Helen was asking, or Mary was asking the question about whether the fact that perhaps Carmarthenshire sees itself as a food producing county, you know, how important is that sense of identity around food production, and whether we perhaps don't have that as much in other areas. And it made me think that actually that's what we need regionally, isn't it? We need to really see ourselves as a region that can feed itself, as a region that supports sustainable food growing at all levels. The enormity and the importance of massive action and the scale of the challenge, which Jeff has so clearly articulated for us all as part of today's discussion. But not losing sight of the fact that it's, you know, those community-led initiatives, the importance of volunteers around those local food hubs, really, really important points made there. So much great insight shared. I hope you guys agree that it's been really useful to come together as our 4 counties of Southwest Wales, share knowledge, reassert our commitment to this, and share our perspectives on what the key priorities are. And we've all got busy jobs in organisations that are trying to address these things from different angles. So hopefully today empowers all of us to go away with some fresh perspectives, some renewed enthusiasm, and hopefully some new connections and knowledge from other parts of the system. I just want to flag up that for us For the Region, really busy with lots of things over the next few months. And one of those things is that we are convening what we're calling a Green Recovery Conference on the 16th of June. So there's a date for your diaries. That will be an in-person event in the Swansea Arena, and food is intended to be a massive part of that Green Recovery Conference. So please put that date in your diary. That's probably the next conversation we'll be hosting that will have a big food component to it. But we'd also invite you to get in touch with us if you'd like to help us shape the next regional food conference, which will probably happen later in the year, in the autumn. But let's shape what that should look like. And please do keep us in touch with other projects and initiatives related to food. We are well networked and keen to be more networked and to share information on all your initiatives and projects. And I'll take away the action of trying to get policy colleagues here for a more policy focused conversation next time. I think that is going to be a useful focus for us. But in the meantime, we will circulate the notes and the recording from today's session so you can share with colleagues, contacts and friends. And thank you all for continuing to support us in this mission, and well done for all your hard work, and we'll see you again soon. So thank you very much. That's it for now. Bye for now.